Hi everyone, so this is number 4 in a series of painting a still life. So what we're going to do on this one is look at putting a little bit more detail into our work, maybe building up some glazes as well. So I'm going to continue with my acrylics, and then Phil's going to continue with his oils. What are you up to, Phil?
I'm concentrating today on the negative side of painting. In in painting positively is painting the objects themselves. Painting negatively is the space in between those objects.
Yeah.
What lies behind and what lies in the middle and what lies in front.
So it's the kind of stuff we've looked at in class. It's like what I'm saying sometimes is when you're painting, you've got to look at everything. You can't just paint the objects in isolation because there's reflections and stuff of everything going round. So if you look at the positive, which are the bottles, and then obviously look at the spaces in between and see what you can add to them that lifts the objects up. So as we're going on with painting, Phil's still using larger brushes. Larger brushes to get us started off, to get us some of those big marks in, and then what I'm going to do now is move on to slightly smaller brushes so my marks get a little bit smaller, and that's how I can start to kind of build up some of the detail into it as well. So again, I've got my primary colours, and well, let's have a look. You can see I've got my primary colours and I've got some white as well. I'm using the white separately, just in a little jar, just so it doesn't get too muddy with it as well. So that's what I'm going to continue doing, and what I'm going to try and do is put some glazes onto it to lift that foreground out as well. Okay, so let's have a see if you can, yep, see the board, you can see me and see Phil. Okay, that's brilliant.
So I've set it out with what the objects, the space that they occupy, the relationships in between each element of the subject, and just a wee bit of shadow pattern in there, just to, so it still remains very simple and in some respects extremely abstract at this moment, and it is nice in a painting to try to keep a certain amount of that in your painting.
So what I'm doing here, let me see if you can see it, I'll bring it a bit closer, is, let's do it that way. Here, because this is the foreground and I want it to stand out a little bit more, so I'm going to use my warm colour. But what I've started to do here is use a glaze, is a thinned out paint. Because I'm using acrylic, a glaze is going to be the paint with some water added, and then you just get it nice and thin, and then you can just layer it over the dried colour underneath. It's got to be dry underneath, and what you're trying to do is let the underneath colour come through, so then that becomes not just like an orange like this one, but more of a got more depth to it, because that blue is underneath it as well. So you just need to put it on quite thin, and you can build up those, and you can see, hopefully you can, see how you can see some of the blue coming through, but see how it changes the depth to it as well, and that's what it's all about now, is adding that little bit more depth to it. I don't want to just put an orange there, and I don't want to put a blue there, because that's not like going to help with the overall depth of it, yeah? So I'm just going to carry on doing that. Like I said, with glazes with acrylics, you use the water to thin it down, and with oils, like what Phil will be doing, is you use the oil to thin it down with all the tips.
Right. What I've done now, I'm manipulating, because we make a black up of burnt umber and ultramarine. We can use that mix to make a cooler paint or a warmer paint, so that you can put within the painting an illusion of either recedance by using more blue in the mix, and a forward advancement by using more brown in the mix. The brown one, which is a very burnt orange in actual effect, is the warm inside of things, and the blue is the cool inside of things. So it can give you another illusion of the perspective within each object itself, or how it relates to its neighbour.
So hopefully you can see on mine here, I'm just trying to, again, let's have a little look at it. I'm using that glaze just to change the tone of those blues as well. So it keeps it quite warm, but then it gives it that depth as well. And also on painting, again, you've got to decide how you want to do it, in terms of how you want it to look. But I'm quite happy with just keeping the brush strokes a little bit smaller and keeping to that little cross hatch feel to it. But can you see the change that just putting another kind of orange over the orange as a glaze? Let me do it here. Just changes the tone of it. So it stops it looking like it's straight out the tube, but it still gives us that idea of warm colour. Yeah, quite liking that actually. But I need to kind of now work on some of this, getting this detail around the top of the bottles out. So that's why we've got to have smaller brushes now. And like Phil was saying, sometimes when you're trying to make a shape like that around the bottle, you can paint it in, yeah, to get the shape of it. But sometimes if you work with the negative, like Phil's doing on there, if you work with the negative space behind, you can then create that shape. So to bring that out, I want to make that bit here a little bit darker, because it is on the still life anyhow, but that will then make that ellipse stand out a little bit more just by working in that reverse. So we don't always have to paint that, we can paint this bit behind to emphasise the foreground as well.
I've just gone into doing a little bit more positive work. This is primarily just using white and reinforcing again the cylindrical forms of each individual object, and just again suggesting the relationship each individual neighbour has with its surrounding objects. Because at this moment you don't really have to, the detail isn't needed, it's not necessary. What you're looking at is still the development of the composition. To try to make it a worthwhile design and a
so if you can see what I've been doing here is that where I've got this ellipse going round, so it's quite light here and then it's got a little bit of a shadow. So if I make that at the background there a little bit more blue into it, again that's going to help with sending that back and bringing that forward, so you can see that it's a little bit more, it's got a bit more 3D depth to it as well.
So with the introduction of the white on top of the negative work I've done, it starts to develop later on in the painting where a harsh edge would be and where a soft edge would be, where how the background involves itself with the subject matter. So this is where you weigh up the composition and try to predict to some extent the outcome.
Now I find when you're painting, and when you're doing any kind of art really, when you're painting, because of the approach that you can do, which is quite loose and build it up, you're going to lose the precision of it in some respects, but then you'll get it back. It's just keep building it up. Like with oils, if Phil wanted to now, he could wipe that off and start again. You can't see it the same way in acrylics, but you just have to keep building it up, and you've got to be a bit more flexible and be willing to change things as you go along, so you can kind of, you know, like especially with acrylics, because if it's dried now and I put that orange there and I don't like it, I can rub it off while it's still a bit wet, but if I let it dry I can put that blue back in. But it's just a case of just placing all your colours into them, and again being as detailed as you like with them. Again using the smaller brushes as well, like I've just been doing here, just smaller brush marks coming in. So that means you've got more control over where you're going to put things. Okay, so I hope that helps for number 4. This one is just really just kind of keep putting some of those colours in, building up that depth, trying not to rush to kind of make it look like it. Now what I do when I'm painting is I'll look into the little sections of it and try and build it up that way. Okay, well thanks very much. Any questions, you know what to do. Thank you.